know these things, so why the reminders? Well, why do we need to be reminded of things? Ladies in the room, why do we need reminders? Because we forget. Any other reason why we might need a reminder? So I would like to say that sometimes I have so many things vying for attention in my brain that I need to make a reminder because I just know I might recall it like a few days later, but I need it right then, so I need to write it down. And then I need to prioritize it. That would be another reason why I need a reminder, because it's a priority, and with everything else that's going on, sometimes even the things that you prioritize, if you don't write them down, get forgotten. So why, and you're going to really love this question, why do you need to remind other people of things? Like your children. Why would you need to remind them to put on deodorant? You have boys, you know. Why? Why can't you just do it? But we have to remind other people for the same reason. It just slips their mind. Or, maybe it's not a priority, but it is to you. So as we look at these, really our need for reminding and our need for a reminder from Peter boils down to two reasons. Number one, we forget. We forget. I always like to remind myself that we give the Israelites such a hard time for what they were like in the wilderness. How could you just forget what God just did? But we do the exact same thing. Number two, it's important. Okay? So we need reminders because we forget, and it's important. All right. We will work really hard to remember things that are important to us. So things like cell phone numbers. Now, we can store our cell phone numbers and not have to remember them, but when it comes to your own, you remember that because you have to write it down 5 times whenever you go to the doctor and you're filling out papers. I don't get that. One time should be enough. Okay, Social Security numbers. You have that memorized. That's a lot of digits. Math facts, which maybe you wouldn't consider important, but they're really useful. Children's birth dates, we memorize those. Our anniversaries, addresses, on and on. And it's not like I store those in memory and never call them up. They're important, so I access them. It's the same thing for what Peter has just revealed. Yes, his audience knows these things, just like we know the things that we studied for the past 3 weeks. But yes, his audience, including us, still needs to be reminded because, yes, they are that important. And in verses 12, 13, and 15, Peter uses variations of the word remind. We see the word remind in verse 12, we see reminder in verse 13, and then we see the phrase call these things to mind in verse 15. That's a lot of reminding, but we need it. So in verses 13 through 15, we see Peter get down to the motivation for why he's writing. So let's look at these verses again. So these are just verses 13 through 15. I consider it right, as long as I am in this earthly dwelling, to stir you up by way of reminder, knowing that the laying aside of my earthly dwelling is imminent, as also our Lord Jesus Christ has made clear to me. And I will also be diligent that at any time after my departure, you will be able to call these things to mind. So Peter knows that he has little time left on this earth. Jesus has made that clear to him. So he offers reminders to kind of stir up his audience. And I hope that as we covered those reminders over the past 3 weeks, they maybe stirred you up as well. Peter uses another word that we're very familiar with him using, diligent. He uses that again in verse 15. He says that he's going to be diligent with these reminders so that after he's gone, the listeners will be able to call them to mind. And we do that. We do that now, don't we? We try to recall important things that are said by meaningful people. We may remember phrases that our parents said over and over again, some to teach us and some to make us laugh. And as I was writing this, things just started pouring into my mind, like my granddad. He would sing the Kool-Aid song to us when we were kids. I didn't know there was a Kool-Aid song. He might have just made it up. But it was so cute because every time I remember like being 5 years old in his kitchen, and he would come in singing the Kool-Aid song. And I remember that about him. I remember that being a part of my growing up. And then my great uncle, who was his brother, always called me Rabinsky. He never just called me Robin. It was always, hey, Rabinsky. And then my mother, she could always be counted on to correct my grammar. And I might have rolled my eyes a few times, but it's really paying off now, so thanks, Mom. My dad, and those of you who know him, he has a lot of phrases of note that I love to keep up with. When answering the door, and he tends to just do this with family, he always says, "We gave at the office." So like we'll knock and he'll open the door and he'll look right at us and go, "We gave at the office," and close the door. So now my kids say it to him whenever he visits our house, and they close the door. If he asks how you're doing and you say, "I'm good," he'll respond with, "There is none good, no, not one." So we have the book of Romans to thank for that one. And my kids say that back to him now if they ever catch him saying, "I'm all good." So I smile as I bring these things to memory, and I'm sure Peter was smiling as he was writing down his recountings of his encounters with Jesus for his audience. So Peter's words would have held much weight for the people who were reading the letter. He was a church founder. He was a planter. These bodies of believers existed because of work that he did. They wanted to hear what he had to say, especially what he had to say at the end of his life. So as we turn the corner to now he's doing his recounting, Peter starts with a statement that might cause some to wonder why it was even necessary for him to write it. So let's look at 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 16 through 18. "For we did not follow cleverly devised tales when we made known to you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, but we were eyewitnesses of his majesty. For when he received honor and glory from God the Father, such an utterance as this was made to him by the majestic glory, 'This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased.' And we ourselves heard this utterance made from heaven when we were with him on the holy mountain." So that phrase that I kind of hinted to is, "We did not follow cleverly devised tales." So Peter's about to give his eyewitness account of his experience on the Mount of Transfiguration, but he starts with this statement first. And so we're asking, why is it necessary for him to start with this? And if you've read through 2 Peter chapter 2 especially, you will know why this was necessary. False prophets were already invading the early church, and Paul dealt with this as well in several of his letters. New converts to Christianity were caught somewhere between their old beliefs and their new beliefs, and now people were teaching them things that seemed to combine the two. So they were trying to meld these old beliefs with new beliefs. And to these new converts who didn't know any different, it seemed to be true because it contained truth in it, but it was really a lie wrapped in truth. So I want you to think of it as a wolf in sheep's clothing, but the wolf is false doctrine. Okay, so that's what he's battling against. So Peter says, in essence, we're not working with the world system here. This isn't made up. He knows what he's up against. The world's teaching can be so convincing. It's clever. And the architect is the devil himself. And he's been clever since the beginning. So here's some well-crafted lies that we would be led to believe are true. So I just want you guys to think about this for a second. Just like the early Christians were starting to hear some of these well-conceived lies that had just a hint of truth in them, we have the same thing that's coming at us today. So I want you to read through these. They come from a book called The Gospel According to Satan. And when you hear that title, you're probably like, "Oh, that's a book I would never read." Trust me, it's written by a Christian man. His name is Jared Wilson. He's on staff at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, as a matter of fact, where Rachel is right now. But I actually started reading him before we even knew that she'd attend there. But his name is Jared Wilson. Great book. Pick it up if you're a reader. If not, pick it up anyway and read it. So these are some of Satan's most well-crafted lies that we believe today. God just wants you to be happy. Okay? We've heard that in all of its variations. You only live once. Okay, that was really popular a while ago. Still, even though you might say that phrase is outdated, we still live as if that phrase is true. Well, just live your life because you only live once. You need to live your truth. Okay, guys, seriously, no. Your feelings are reality. What you feel is what you feel, and it's just reality. Your life is what you make it. That's, kind of on par with, oh, wait, what is it? Oh, you let go and let God. That's in there. You need to let go and let God. Those two are kind of partner phrases. The cross is not about wrath. Now, that's a big one, because there have been people who have taken key phrases out of worship songs that refer to God's wrath and have repackaged them with different wording because they want it soft. They want the gospel tolerable. And so they've taken away the need to appease God's wrath. And then finally, God helps those who help themselves. That's not in the Bible. All right, so some of those we know are out and out lies, but we can fall for the deviations of them. And some of us might have had friends who have also fallen for those lies. But Peter is now going to offer something that no one can dispute. He's going to offer his personal story, and he starts with, "We were eyewitnesses of his majesty." Now, an eyewitness is someone who hears and sees things about events and people. They were there, an eyewitness, I was there, and they took it all in. So you guys know I was hit by a car when I was 6. My mom was an eyewitness. So she saw all the parts of what happened. She heard the shrieking brakes. She heard the impact. She saw my body bounce all over that car until it hit the concrete driveway. And still to this day, she can tell with clear detail every event of every ounce of what happened that day. I can't. The last thing I remember is the front tire of the car that hit me. That is it. My memory stops there. I vividly remember the tire, but that is it. But because of her recounting, I can construct in bits and pieces what it might have looked like because her retelling is so vivid. So I have drawn in my mind what the accident must have looked like, but I'm sure it's nothing like the reality of what my mom saw. And she still carries that inside of her today. So Peter's experience on the Mount of Transfiguration was unique. Okay, the moment was only shared with him and James and John. Jesus was very specific in who he chose. So let's just look at a review of this event. We're actually going to look at Luke's account, and that's in Luke 9:28 through 26. And he starts with, "Some 8 days after these sayings, he took along Peter and John and James and went up on the mountain to pray. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face became different, and his clothing became white and gleaming. And behold, 2 men were talking with him, and they were Moses and Elijah, who, appearing in glory, were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now Peter and his companions," I love that Peter's the one that's brought up. It's not James or John. It doesn't say John and his companions or James and his companions. It's Peter and his companions. "Had been overcome with sleep," probably because of the sleeping. All right. Anyway, they were overcome with sleep, but when they were fully awake, they saw his glory and the 2 men standing with him. And as these were leaving him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 tabernacles, one for you, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah," not realizing what he was saying. While he was saying this, a cloud formed and began to overshadow them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. Then a voice came out of the cloud saying, "This is my son, my chosen one. Listen to him." And when the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone. And they kept silent and reported to no one in those days of any of the things which they had seen. Okay, so Peter was one of the 3 who were privileged to see Jesus as fully God in this moment. So the veil of his human nature was peeled back for just a moment, and Jesus showed his true divine nature. And you see the quote there, "The appearance of his face became different, and his clothing became white and gleaming." And Matthew's account would add, "His face shone like the sun, and his garments became as white as light." Now, on my way here, we had a setting sun, and I don't know what it is about when I'm coming down Hobbs Road, and I'm at the traffic light where it's intersecting with Memorial Parkway, and if you are unfortunate to be sitting there right as the sun is setting, and you are desperately trying to find out if that light is either red or green, is it time for me to go? I can't tell. There's the sun right there. And it is so hard to look. And I can't. Thankfully, there was a car in front of me, so I just went when he did. It's like, I'm just going to trust that the light is green. But it's that kind of brightness that Luke and Matthew are getting at when he's talking about that type of white and his face shining like the sun. What's amazing to me is that Peter and James and John slept right through the beginning of this. And they must be tired. They were out. Okay? However, when they did wake up, the magnitude of this moment suddenly hits Peter. And true to form, Peter speaks without thinking. He makes the suggestion that they set up tabernacles for Jesus and Moses and Elijah. Now remember, we're gonna cut him some slack because Peter hasn't received the full indwelling of the Holy Spirit at this point, so we can't fault him for his faulty doctrine. But to build tabernacles for Jesus, Moses, and Elijah would mean putting them all on equal footing as deity. Peter is still operating under the worldly systems of his day. Now remember, at this time, the Greek and Roman mythological system was still firmly in place, and a god or goddess for whatever the need was kind of the norm. So you just, called onto your god and goddess for whatever the need was. So he's still kind of operating under that system of, okay, we'll just set up 3 tabernacles, just like there's a temple to Diana over here, and there's a temple over here for this one, and there's a temple over here. He was thinking in kind of that mentality. So at the moment this ill-conceived idea was even uttered, God speaks, "This is my son, my chosen one." So God affirms Jesus' deity. Do you hear him saying that about Moses and Elijah? No, of course not. And then all of a sudden, as soon as those words are uttered, everything seems to just kind of shut down. Only Jesus remained. He instructed Peter and James and John to tell no one at that time what had taken place. But now Peter's telling it. And this is his eyewitness account. He saw Jesus in his glory. He saw him as 100% God. It happened, and it was real. So understanding that Jesus is fully God and fully man at the same time is critical to Christian belief. But just like some of those lies that Satan spreads around, there are some teachings that are actually going around today that would lead us to understand that Jesus was just 100% man for most of his life on earth, that he wasn't fully God the whole time. There are actually people who are teaching this right now. This is just as old as that Gnostic teaching that we studied when we went through the book of 1 John. If we can make, this is what's at the core of it, if we can make Jesus more like us, we diminish his authority. And if we diminish his authority, we get to call the shots. It's the Garden of Eden all over again. Guys, there's nothing new that's happening here. It's just all the same stuff, and we keep falling for it. Now, you may not have an eyewitness account of Jesus' glory, but you do have a personal account of what he's done in your life. He rescued you. He showed you favor. He showed you grace, and he gave you mercy when you deserved none of it. And he teaches you today, and he calls you to more. And just like Peter, you have a testimony to share. So our job is to recount our own lives, our own experiences with him, and then pass that on. And that's actually where we're going to leave off tonight. So it's short. I know, it's only 7:15. What's up with that? I know, you're like, oh, we need more. No, because that's the end of chapter 1, and I don't want to move into chapter 2 and until we can do it in a chunk. So next week, we're actually going to start chapter 2. When I say start, my manuscript for this is 28 pages long. So it's going to take us a few weeks. But I encourage you guys, even those of you at home, this next chapter is so critical and crucial. And I could say that about the whole of the Bible, but this next chapter is especially so critical and crucial for the times that we're in right now, especially with people who are watching so much on TV, are watching so much on YouTube for their spiritual nourishment right now while we're in quarantine, because there's a lot of false teaching out there. So this is a good time for us to be studying this so that we know how to discern truth and lie. So it's actually going to be, the section is going to be called Warnings, because we just went through reminders, we went through recounting, and now we're going to move into warnings, and specifically towards false prophets and false teachers and false gospels. So it's gonna be something else. I might have to bring out a soapbox or two. So anyway, that's where we're gonna end tonight, and I'll see you back again next week. So let me pray. God, thank you so much for the gift of personal testimony, for the ability to have a personal experience with you that is so meaningful to us as individuals, but please don't let us think that that's something that just stays with us. Just like we can recount pivotal events with such clarity for other people, please help us to be motivated to do that when it comes to our personal experiences with you, that we might be able to tell those details in such a meaningful and clear way that people will just want to hang on for more. And we have so much to share. So I just pray that you would put us in situations where we would be given the gift of sharing our stories. And as we prepare for next week, I also just want to ask that you would give me the time to study well, because this next chapter is a heavy one. So I just pray, especially specifically for me as I continue to study my notes, that those things that you would have us to study, that you would have me to share, would be the things that you put on my mind as I'm studying. For the ladies who have taken part in this study too, I just pray for strength as we continue to go through it. I pray for discernment and wisdom, because we're really going to need a lot of it as we go through this next chapter. And I thank you so much for the gift of your word and our ability to study it. Amen.